There we go. Good morning, everybody, to the Contemporary Issues class, January 10. After a busy week in Washington this week, we could spend the hour talking about that, but we're not going to today. We're going to delay that a little bit. We are going to have Ron do session 2 of the Mississippi Burning Civil Rights Issues. So welcome here. And a usual announcements, please mute yourself in your lower left corner of your screen by clicking on the mute icon. And we are recording this for future playback. And I hope everybody's doing good. And let's talk for a minute about events of the last week, a minute or two. And but we want to leave plenty of time for Ron's presentation. So we were just talking about it before we started. We're 4 days after the riot on the Capitol in Washington, D.C. today, and it is the big news of the week. We thought the big news was earlier in the week was the phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State asking them to find 11,780 votes, but that was eclipsed quickly by the riot on the Capitol. So it's been a busy week. Any short comments on how we feel about it? Hard to sum up a little bit. I thought Rev Mark's sermon was good today, saying it's easy to condemn and we should condemn bad behavior, but we also should go beyond and heal and put the focus on that where we can.
To me, it's more concerning all the people, whether you blame Trump or not, and whether you're on that side or not. I don't want to go down that road. I have my own personal views, but I think it's more concerning about the weight of the right, the amount of people that are on that side of the conservative right. That is really scary. Wow, that they're ready to do these kind of things. Wow, that's I don't know. Karen said the word "I'm stunned." I think that summarizes how I feel. Stunned, unbelievable. But
in a couple of weeks, Ron is going to present to us about why people follow authoritarian figures and the psychology behind that. Ron, do you want to give a little preview of that?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the psychology of authoritarianism and a couple different kinds of authoritarianism. And I was preparing some slides yesterday to look at 7 distinct reasons people get into that. And we'll be talking about things like compartmentalized reasoning, where in your mind, you can hold 2 different thoughts and you put them in different compartments in your mind, but they are incompatible. If you try to blend them together, they don't mix. It's like saying, my husband was at a business meeting in Minneapolis yesterday, and he was also frolicking on the beach in Florida at the same time. Those are incompatible things. And so we'll get into a good bit of psychology. And I'd sure love to have Doug Moen's daughter today.
What about that, your friend?
Because it's not going to be an anti-Trump presentation. It's going to be looking at what makes people think in certain modes and fall into certain patterns. So I think it's going to be extremely interesting. I encourage you all to tune in.
I don't know if any of the rest of you are having this issue, but we have family members that just cannot get along over this whole political issue.
Yeah.
And Steve and I were talking about it yesterday about how, you got to learn to love those people for who they are and just stay away from what they believe when it comes to politics, because I mean, it has torn up some relationships in our family that are pretty significant. And I don't know, they know each other's triggers and they go there, and it's just sad, So we just have to learn to live a little bit above it, and love them for who they are. I know, I just refuse to get into it, I just refuse to get into it, but
Well,
we all
Vicki-
have it.
Vicki, what you're talking about, certainly we've experienced, it has caused a separation between my sister-in-law and her husband.
Yeah.
Oh,
They live together because of the acrimony and the stress it's created. So that's just another supportive of what you're saying.
mhm.
Well, with all the activity this week, it really overshadowed the momentous vote in Georgia and the implications for the country and for Georgia.
Yeah, let's look at that kind of thing next week. Some of that. And also next week, I want to talk a little about socialism too. I think a lot of people obviously are scared that the Democrats now in full control of the Congress will lead us down the road to runaway socialism. So I'd like to look at what is socialism and why are we scared of it? What are the dangers? So next week, I think I'll do some research. Thank you, Doug, for your thumbs up. And we'll talk a little about that. Okay, Vicki, did you want to talk about food donation?
I just want
Can't hear you.
There you go.
Project is just putting $1 a day in a can so that at the end of the month, we'll have $30 for if 10 people do it, we'll have 300. If 20 people do it, we'll have 600. So let's just do this little thing, $1 a day and see if we can't help the food banks.
All right, we can. Hey. Okay, Ron, thank you.
Steve,
Go
I
ahead,
was
Helen.
just going to mention something, about all the events this past week. And for those of us, I swear, after almost a year of the pandemic, I honestly swear I've got depression, anxiety, I don't know what. But the thing at the Capitol just really shocked me. I've been there with family, like 4 times, and you very orderly go in and show your ID and so forth, and how that many people managed to circumvent all the rules and tear the place up. It was horrible for some of us to see and deal with. And then the next thing, I had the movie Mississippi Burning scheduled to play it Saturday, which I did yesterday. But I'm telling you, I sobbed through most of that movie. It was like so much anxiety all in 1 week. I almost had that feeling from the Wednesday event, really. And then, oh my gosh, the noise, the violence. And I know it was important, but I, as a person, man, I had trouble dealing with it. I really did. So maybe that's a segue into Mississippi Burning.
Thank you, Helen. There are comparisons, to the movie and this week activity. Confederate flag being paraded through the Capitol was not a pleasant sight to see. Okay, thank you, everybody.
The drama, of the whole thing.
Yes.
Both events you can't expect they would happen in our country.
Right.
Anyway.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, go ahead, Ron. Thank you.
All righty. Picking up from last week, we had, of course, talked about the Plessy-Ferguson Act decision of the Supreme Court in the late 1800s that legalized segregation, opened it wide open. And then we talked about the Brown versus the Board of Education decision of the Supreme Court in 1954. We listened to the song Black and White by Three Dog Night. And then we talked about how at Oxford, Ohio, there was a decision made to make a move on Mississippi to try to open it up. And idealistic volunteers who decided to go into Mississippi in the summer of 1964 and register voters and do some other things. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. So it's 1964. Mississippians are now aware that these idealistic college students and pastors, whatever, are going to come down to the state and try to register voters. And we see a sudden and instant resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan there in Mississippi in 1964. As this slide shows, in February, the Mississippi Klan had 300 members. By June, that's not many months later, they had over 6,000 members operating in 60 of the 82 Mississippi counties. So there was definitely an incredible backlash. We're going to step back in history and talk for just a moment. There's a famous speech that was given just before, a couple of weeks before the firing on Fort Sumter. Shown in that picture is Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederate States of America. And he gave an infamous, I'll call it now, speech called the Cornerstone Speech. And I'm just going to emphasize one line out of that. And he said, our new government is founded upon, and it goes on to say, the cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. So this speech was in 1861, and yet 1964, which we're stepping into, is more than 100 years later, and we still see a strong element of this speech from 100 years before. We're now going to listen to a song, or at least a small segment of it. I was a drugstore delivery boy when I was in high school. It was a neat job. Worked in a drugstore and went out in the delivery truck. And my older brother used to kid a little bit. He said, you know, there's a song about a drugstore truck driving man. And here's the first words of it. And I'm going to play just a little bit of it on the lady here. Alexa, play Drugstore Truck Driving Man.
Here's Drugstore Truck Driving Man by the Byrds on Amazon Music.
Alexa, stop. Okay, well, I'm not trying to make humor out of something that isn't humorous, but I'm not, but I definitely wasn't head of the Ku Klux Klan as I was driving my drugstore delivery wagon. Okay, here's an engineer. I'm a proud engineer, but I'm not proud of this guy. This is Sam Bowers. He was born in New Orleans, 1924. And in February, he was selected to be the Imperial Wizard of the Mississippi Ku Klux Klan. That's the top position of the Ku Klux Klan at the state level. An educated man, college educated engineer from the University of Southern California and Tulane University, and a smart man. But if we get anything out of this, it's that smart doesn't preclude evil. Sadly, you can be well educated, you can have a high IQ, but you can fall morally off the table. So smart doesn't make you moral. And that's certainly an important lesson we'll see as we move on today. Okay, as head of the Mississippi Ku Klux Klan, Bowers, that's his last name, had a secret code. Rodney Dangerfield used to kid in one of his movies, Back to School. He said, as he gave a commencement speech in that movie, which is quite funny, he said, as you're looking out for number 1, don't step in number 2. Well, they had some number 1, 2, 3s, and 4s in the Klan down there, and they weren't about stepping in number 2. Number 1 was a cross burning, number 2, a whipping, 3, a firebombing, and 4, a killing. And Bowers, how's that for rules of authority in your organization? Bowers was the only man in Mississippi who could order a number 3 or a number 4. So it was almost like a Burger King menu where he called up a number. Pretty serious stuff, and it certainly shows the violence that the organization had. Look at this third bullet. And Bowers said this and believed it in his heart. He said he felt like the Freedom Summer folk coming into Mississippi were dedicated agents of Satan, liberal media whores, Jews, communists, homosexuals, atheists, and their sympathizers dedicated to destroying Christian civilization and Christians. So, yeah, there's an interesting brand of Christianity. Reminded me of that store down in Aspen Grove on Santa Fe called the Build-A-Bear store. And you could build and I guess you could go in there and build a Jesus that fits your particular interpretation. I've also shown on here from history 2 of the more hideous people from the Nazi war crime lineup. The first gentleman there is Adolf Eichmann, who had escaped to South America, along with, they estimate, about 9,000 other Nazis. And he was kidnapped in South America by some Jewish secret agents and brought back to Israel for trial in the early 60s. And then the gentleman on his right, and I shouldn't use the word gentleman, was the horrible
Dr. Mengele.
Mengele, who conducted horrific medical experiments on Jewish concentration camp people. So we're not talking about loose fit political organizations. We're talking about, with the Ku Klux Klan at that time, an incredibly violent organization. In fact, there's the tally in Mississippi in 1964. Quite a scorecard. Firebombed 20 project offices, 30 black homes, 37 churches. Tally that number. That's getting close to 100 firebombings. 80 volunteers beaten by white mobs, and more than 1,000 people arrested. Most of those arrests were spurious arrests, where a law enforcement person would just pull somebody over, think that they were part of this Mississippi project, and haul them off to jail. And then there were almost a dozen civil rights workers and local blacks murdered. Lynchings in the South. There's some horrible pictures on the internet of some lynching and lynching victims, many of whom were burned, horribly mutilated, beaten, stabbed, and just viciously murdered and killed. And they actually, in some cases, issued postcards inviting people, advertising the lynching, inviting people who brought picnic baskets to the lynchings. This didn't happen so much in 1964, although it hadn't stopped by then, but it was certainly part of the history at that time. So we're going to stop for a minute and ask questions. Are there people and organizations in the US today who approach the level of the KKK and terror? And I would offer a few. Certainly the Oklahoma City bomber did. The young man who did the massacre in the South Carolina church. And we, in Contemporary Issues, watched a movie a couple years ago titled, it was a Frontline movie titled Documenting Hate. And it talked about the Adam Waffen division of the neo-Nazis. And we also point out that they uncovered the plot to do something nasty to Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. So I want to throw it out there. Do you think there's people out there today that can do these sorts of things?
Absolutely.
Right, so.
Unfortunately.
Ron, it's interesting. I read just a couple days ago, there is a beautiful little white church in northern Minnesota, a Lutheran church, no longer being utilized. And an alt-right group has taken over the church, and the membership is restricted. You have to be a native European in order to join the church. Rather ironic, if you know northern Minnesota, it's the land of the Ojibwe and native. But anyway, native Europeans only. So that's just an indication of how some people are worshiping these days.
Taking babies from the mothers of immigrants approaches this kind of evil.
Agreed.
Okay. All righty. As they looked at this crime, a preacher actually, whose name was Edgar Killen, actually received the number 4 order from Bowers to eliminate a specific civil rights worker, Schwerner, shown there in the right picture. And the order was put out to kill Schwerner by the head of the Ku Klux Klan. And then the plot unfolded for this man to be murdered. And Killen was a 38-year-old ordained Baptist preacher in 1964. And he was a key recruiter organizer of the Neshoba, Lauderdale County Ku Klux Klan. All right. In Neshoba County, where this horrific killing occurred of the 3 civil rights workers in the summer of '64, there were the 2 top law enforcement people in Neshoba County were Sheriff Lawrence Rainey, shown there on the right or the left, and his deputy Cecil Price on the right. And they look like good old boys. Sorry about that for my prejudice. Rainey had an 8th grade education, quit work to become a mechanic before going into law enforcement. And he had actually shot and then killed 2 black men in the line of duty prior to the summer of '64. So he wasn't afraid to use his pistol to do things. All righty. The 3 civil rights workers who were killed, Mickey Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney. The Klan was going after Schwerner specifically, but these 2 other unfortunate victims were in the car with him at the same time, and they snuffed out their lives as well. There's a picture on the right here of Schwerner with his wife, Rita, and they were very social-minded, justice-minded volunteers. All right, what happened that night was Schwerner was arrested. He was put in jail and held in jail for a good bit of time. They let him go, they being the sheriff and his deputy sheriff, but they put out word to their fellow Klansmen that they were going to nail this guy. Rainey and his deputy told their locals that they're going to release this guy and they want him wiped out. So about the second he got in his car and picked up his buddies, they got followed. And they got followed, they got pulled over, and they got driven to a lonely back road back in the woods, and they were murdered viciously and quickly. There was a pretty good sized group that planned and coordinated this murder. The sheriff and his deputy sheriff tipped off the Klan that they were going to release these guys. They told them they wanted these guys killed, or at least Schwerner killed, and they followed them. And they also arranged, they had a teamwork. Certain people were to kill them, beat them, and others were to get rid of the car. Another team was to dispose of the bodies. Pretty horrific. by any measure. Okay, they were killed, and interestingly enough,
What's your
it
picture?
was this is when they located the remains of them, and it took them a couple months to find out where they were buried and where the bodies were. But there was a farm owned by a Philadelphia. When we say Philadelphia, we mean Philadelphia, Mississippi, businessman named Olin Barrage. He had reportedly told the Klan people at a meeting, well, I've got a big old dam being built on my farm, and hell, he said, I've got a dam that'll hold 100 of them. He was telling them that you need to get rid of some bodies. I've got a place to put them. And sure enough, they took him up on his offer, and that's what happened. On the right there is the picture of the dam, and it was a huge earthen dam that they had to dig into to find the bodies. And there's a marker of the event that happened on June 21st, back there on a lonely road in Mississippi. All right. As soon as they disappeared, the civil rights workers, there was a search for them, and they suspected something bad had happened. They didn't think they were just missing on a hike in the woods. And Robert Kennedy, who was then Attorney General, ordered Joe Sullivan, an FBI agent, to get on the case. And they thought maybe the bodies were possibly in the swampy area near the killing site. And they borrowed 400 sailors from the Meridian Naval Air Station and began searching the swamp with poles and boats to try to find the bodies. They didn't. The number of FBI agents involved in the search quickly swelled to about 258 agents. So there was a real push to try to figure it out. Okay. Interestingly enough, and I want to go off on a side trip here and say, when we present a lesson or put forth a political opinion, we should be able to back it up with fact. And here's a case where there's some pretty good fact for it, but it's not absolutely conclusively proven. The FBI tried for quite a while, a couple months, to find the bodies and get some leads as to who did it and why. And there was in 1994, some confidential FBI sources that said J. Edgar Hoover brought in at least one person from the Colombo crime family to help crack the case. And it looks like there's some evidence that this really did happen. More specifically, Linda Shiro, who was an ex-girlfriend of this mobster we show here. His name was Greg Scarpa, was nicknamed the Grim Reaper. And it was stated that Scarpa put a gun in the mouth of a Ku Klux Klansman who was being questioned in an effort to get him to talk. There's a scene in the movie, they don't show a mobster trying to get a confession out of a Ku Klux Klansman. They show Gene Hackman acting as an FBI agent, threatening with a razor blade to do some things to a guy if he doesn't talk, and the guy does talk. But it does look like there very possibly could be some truth to this story. The fact that there seem to be multiple confirmed reports coming from confidential FBI sources, and Linda indicating her boyfriend Scarpa did verify this. So here again is a case of evidence that there's some strong evidence for, but it's not conclusively proven. But it makes for some interesting talk. The point of this I'm trying to make is that if we make political or lesson statements, we have to be careful between using fact and using conjecture. And certainly when you make a case like the election was stolen by fraud, you need some evidence to back it up, some good evidence. Here's a case where there is some evidence, but not enough to push it over and say it's conclusive. And that's the fair way to think. So there's my sidelight. Okay, October 13th. So this is now about, let's see, July, August, September. 3.5 months later, the FBI finally got a break. Maybe it was the mobster's gun, but they got a guy by the name of Jim Jordan, one of the Klansmen involved in the murders. He confessed to an FBI agent. He had witnessed the murders and agreed to cooperate. I believe they gave him immunity and waivers, told him if he'd speak up, they wouldn't try him, or at least let him off easy. Jordan moved over to Gulfport, Mississippi in September to take a job at a federal missile site and get away from Neshoba County. But under questioning, he did break finally, and he did say that he knew something about it. Also, Wallace Miller, who was a Lauderdale County, Lauderdale's right next to Neshoba County, began cooperating with the FBI after the bodies were discovered. And he pointed out that Jordan was one of the killers. Jordan confessed and was brought back to Georgia. And it turned out he was the only prosecution witness to the shootings who took the stand against the Klansmen. In summary, what did happen that night on the lonely road? And it looks like they pulled all 3 of these civil rights workers out of the car that dark night on a lonely road, back road in Mississippi. And the triggerman, the key triggerman, was this person shown on the right, Wayne Roberts. He shot Schwerner first, then Goodman, and then Cheney. But apparently before he finished all of them off, Jordan said, I'm going to shoot that SOB, and put a couple bullets into 1 or 2 of them. And then Roberts finished them all off, though, with quick gunshots to the head. So Roberts did most of the killing. Jordan, though, also fired a couple bullets into at least one of them. So it was a very heinous murder. And they said about Roberts, his personality, no surprise, he was a dishonorably discharged ex-Marine. And they said he was mean, he was rough, he was mean. He was a rowdy 26-year-old ex-Marine, and he was mean as a junkyard dog. So there's people in life that are vicious killers, and certainly Roberts was one of them, and Jordan also put some bullets into these victims. We're going to stop for a question or two here before we get into the trial and ask, how do people get so indoctrinated that they will kill or endanger the lives of others for a political, religious, or civic issue? Any comments out there?
I think the movie showed it very well by having all of the little children listen to the speech and get involved in the emotion of it.
I think with these people, you have to always look at what kind of childhood they had. Did they have good parenting, or did they have any parenting? You usually find that they didn't have a very good childhood.
And also authority figures, if they get preached to by an authority figure that appeals to their fears and desires and biases, and that's going to indoctrinate people too.
Yeah. We know when Jim Jones took his religious order down to South America and they drank the Kool-Aid. Before they drank the Kool-Aid, a California congressman had landed his airplane there at their little airport. And a couple members of that religious order went out and shot him and killed him. So even before the Kool-Aid, Jim Jones had indoctrinated those people to be willing to kill a congressman right there on the airstrip who had flown in to investigate.
And picking up, Ron, what Steve was just saying, you'll be getting at this when you get into the behavioral aspects, but awkward conditioning, constant reinforcement for desired behaviors, and certainly tweeting on a daily basis for people who are already fearful for a variety of reasons, makes for a very receiving host for such messaging, but that does impact behavior. You get the desired behavioral response. You'll be getting into that in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
There was a line in the movie Mississippi Burning that has stuck with me. And it was one of the sympathizers of the KKK. And he said, if we ain't better than the N-word, then who are we better than?
Yep, you need somebody to look down on. All right. This chart, no justice for Mississippi. The Mississippi officials, once they started getting identifying people who were involved, and again, it was a huge group that got involved in this. It was like contemporary issues dividing into subcommittees. Well, this group will do the murder, and this group will do the get rid of the car, and this other group will bury the bodies. It was a group effort of over 18 people involved, and maybe more. So it was a mass event. There's a picture.
Hey, Ron,
yeah.
You had a couple other questions on that previous slide that you didn't go into.
Okay, let's go back to it then.
What is?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I thought we'd move on because.
Well, I think that these questions are religious questions. Number one talks about how do other people who are not good Methodist Christians and have all the right parentage and everything, and have all the right information, how do those bad people, how do they get to be bad? But number two and number three, it seems to me, talks a little bit about us people who are living the good life and making all the right decisions, et cetera. And, in other words, I'm an environmentalist, and am I unjustified in spiking trees? Am I unjustified in doing other violent things to prevent the degradation of the environment, et cetera? And I think those are the kind of issues that need to be justified. The people who are very bigoted in 1964 in Mississippi thought that they were doing the right things. So struggling with these kind of issues is a little bit more difficult when it comes home to roost. So.
Yeah, I was going to open up a discussion on.
This is the same as, he's exactly right, but it's exactly, Jim, the reason why the people attacked the Capitol. It's not just 1965. It seems to be going on just as much today, and maybe more, that there's more hate groups recently than there was.
But they think
they're right. I researched this, well, there were 865 hate groups, and they believe they're right. That, that they were raised a certain way or whatever reasons, and they were indoctrinated, and they think we're wrong, right? I mean, it seems to be.
Black people these days are very concerned about the police departments and about them being victimized by the police departments all the way through our country. And yet, if you go on TV these days, the number of cop shows where the cops are the heroes is so predominant, and hardly anything criticizes the police. So where are the good people and where are the bad people in all of this?
Yeah, I think we could spin off to another lesson on what is an appropriate level of protest. Where do you draw the line between when you step over
Exactly.
what line? I think they could have just carried signs outside of the Capitol, and that would have been acceptable. But the minute you decide you're going to stop the vote and storm and threaten the people, that they certainly went way over the line. Okay, let's move back into to wrap this one up today. So the Mississippi officials refused to prosecute. And so the federal government had to get involved. Charged 18 individuals with conspiring to deprive the 3 activists of their civil rights. And again, because the state had the right to try him for murder, there was no rule on the books for the federal government to charge him with murder. So the best the federal government could do was charge him with violating their civil rights. And it turned out that even one federal judge tried to, federal judge Cox, who was, and as we mentioned last week, was a very ardent segregationist, threw out the indictments of the conspirators because there was a clause in the law that says if you violated somebody's civil rights under color of state law, under color meant as a police officer. You said, well, these other people weren't police officers, so you can't charge them. At any rate, if you want to read more about the legal aspects, and there's quite a bit of it, do read the book Murder in Mississippi. It gets into the law and the legal aspects of this. But to make a long story short, it was the federal government who had to step in and really make charges, federal charges, because the state turned its back. And the federal government arrested 18, but they could only charge them with violating the civil rights of these people they had killed. This picture here on the right is absolutely incredible. This shows Sheriff Rainey and a friend who were under murder or nearly murder charges. Look at all their smiles.
Yeah.
Here they are in court, and they think it's a circus event, and in some respects it was.
It's funny.
Yeah, they certainly weren't afraid of the law. Of the 18 arrests made for violating civil rights, the federal charges still had to be tried in front of Mississippians. It wasn't like they could take the trial to Pennsylvania or Colorado and get a more unbiased jury. They still had to draw jurors from the state of Mississippi. So the federal government arrested 18, and of all those people, there were only 7 minor civil rights violation convictions that were successful. For Preacher Killen, he was charged. He was the guy that certainly was the prime guy in getting the killings underway. He walked after an 11-to-1 hung jury. So we have to credit the Mississippi jury somewhat here. At least 11 out of 12 did want to charge Killen. But there was one lone dissenting lady that said she could never convict the preacher. And she hung the jury and essentially let Killen get off with nothing. Pretty incredible. All right, the federal level trial. It's called United States versus Cecil Price. It was begun October 7th, 1967. That's 4 years later in the Meridian courtroom. And the star prosecution witness was James Jordan. He cracked under the pressure. He, of course, had put 2 bullets into the victims. Hadn't shot him in the head like Wayne Roberts. But he was under the pressure of an anonymous death threat and had to be hospitalized at one point. The 7 defendants there were only 7 that were convicted. And this third bullet mentions those that were convicted. Cecil Price, the Imperial Wizard of the state at the state level, Bowers, Roberts, who had shot 3 of them point blank in the head, Jimmy Snowden, Bill Posey, Ornis Barnett, and Jimmy Artlett. The sentences were 3 to 10 years, which is pretty minor for murdering 3 people in cold blood. None of these people served more than 6 years. So was justice done? No. And Sheriff Rainey was among those acquitted. And 2 of the defendants, Barnett, a candidate for sheriff, and Edgar Killen, had been strongly implicated for the murder, but the jury came to a deadlock and they decided not to retry them. So at least 2 of them, Killen and Barnett, got off the hook entirely. Okay, a little bit of the legal aspects. 1965, there were no federal criminal sanctions to prosecute racially motivated acts of violence until there was finally a couple add-ons to the Civil Rights Act of 64. So if you look in the history, there's a 1964 Civil Rights Act. There's also a 1968 Civil Rights Act. So the federal government actually had to get some Supreme Court opinions to beef up its enforcement capabilities in regard to violating people's civil rights. In that regard, here's how the 1964 Civil Rights Act was voted on in the House of Representatives. And you can see, I don't want to, a little bit of Southern prejudice there, but the Civil Rights Act basically passed through the support of the northern states, the Midwest, Colorado, the western states. And if you'll notice, even today, if you look at the how the electoral votes went in this last election, it fits this map reasonably closely.
Oh.
So sometimes things don't change very fast. Okay, well, as the story ends, 40 years later, the state of Mississippi finally, shall we say, relented. We've got to give a little bit of credit to Republican Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, who in 2004, this is 40 years after the murder, got together with a group of citizens and they decided they were going to reopen this case. And they brought Killen, who's Preacher Killen, whose pictures is the lower one there. They charged him finally. And on January 6, 2005, a Neshoba County grand jury indicted him finally on 3 counts of murder. And the Mississippi Attorney General did prosecute the case. And since murder has no time limits for prosecution, they did convict him. He was not convicted of first-degree murder, but he was convicted of manslaughter. So at age 80, Killen was finally sent off to jail to serve, and he ended up dying of old age in jail. But it took 40 years later for Mississippi to press charges. One of the persons who testified at the trial was the widow of Schwerner. That's Rita Schwerner Bender, who had since remarried, but she did testify at the trial. So justice did come to at least Killen to some degree, and but it was 40 years late. Okay, so let's open it up for some questions. When I lived in Tennessee, by the way, there was a Governor, Ray Blanton, a Democrat, who was thrown out of office 3 days before he was due to leave office because he pardoned 52 state inmates, threw out 52 pardons, and he was due to give out more. The legislature heard about it, had a secret midnight session that he wasn't aware of, and they threw him out of office 3 days before in fear that he was going to literally open the gates to the prisons and throw out maybe hundreds of pardons. So I posed the question, should there be more limits on presidential pardons? And what do you do if a president pardons murderers? Or a president or a governor pardons heinous hate crime offenders? Comments from people. Should there be more reining in of the pardon capability?
But I have just a comment about pardoning. You know, in the founding documents, they did, you know, it was all about giving power to the people rather than to a king. But it's a paradox because they've given the president the power to pardon, which is like a king.
It's true.
I agree, James. Why does the president or a governor have the right to pardon? I don't understand that at all.
It was built into the Constitution and a lot of the state constitutions.
Yeah, but I don't understand the logic behind it. I mean, one person is able to override the whole systemic way of doing business, and all of a sudden one person just goes, that doesn't make any sense to me.
There's another wrinkle, then there's also another wrinkle to this. Can one pardon oneself? You've heard the rumors going around, you know, particularly family members, say on the top of the ninth inning, to be able to pardon oneself. Interesting question.
This is
Ron,
Terry. This is
Go ahead, Terry.
Most governors, at least in this state, the reason they do pardons is that there's been a committee, or for some reason, they petitioned the governor to pardon certain people.
My fear is theoretically the president could call the federal penitentiary down there in Cannon City and just say, let them all go. Or what if after this civil rights trial back in 1964, what if the president, at that time it was Lyndon Johnson, had just made a phone call and said, let them all go. Or a couple years later, said, let them out of jail. We don't want any, it's a fearful capability to put in the hands of one person.
Ron, I always thought maybe it'd be good if the Supreme Court took a case like that and ruled on what limits should be on presidential pardons, clarified what they think it should be.
Sure help.
Well, it'd be more appropriate for the legislature to go and clarify that and make it into law.
And hopefully, I would like to see a constitutional amendment that would severely limit the pardon capability, or have at least a check on it such that it couldn't just be the president. It would have to also be
There's a process.
a 60% vote of, you know, the House or something to go with it.
Just to Ron's comment, this is Jeff. It would take a constitutional amendment in the case of the president to change that, because that is in our Constitution.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't have the Congress make an act that would be contrary to the pardoning powers of the president.
Okay.
Well, Jeff, I'm really serious about that question. Why was that granted to the president? Why? That seems so inconsistent with the Constitution's basic underlying philosophy. of cooperation and limits on each other's power that seems so inconsistent. Why was that included? Do you have any idea?
I would have to go back and relook at the Federalist Papers comments on that. But one thing I do recall was that there was concerns about political imprisonment of people for political reasons, and the powers of the president would allow him to pardon people of his party or people that were imprisoned for political reasons. There may have been other reasons, but I think that is one of them.
Okay, I understand.
I know one of the Trump pardons was to a war criminal who had slaughtered some civilians over there in the Middle East, murdered a couple civilians. So that was certainly not just a political issue. The guy was a war criminal murderer, even though he was, I think, working for the Defense Department.
Yeah, it was Blackwater, and it was three of them.
Contractor, yeah.
Well, that
To one of the other questions, I don't think the president would have much leeway pardoning themselves unless they were actually convicted of a crime while president. And I think the one limitation on the power to pardon is in the case of an impeachment. So normally a president probably couldn't be charged with most crimes while they're still acting and sitting president. And that's the only time they have the power to pardon. So for example, if the Congress convicted President Trump right now of something that made him come out of office, and Vice President Pence became president, Vice President Pence would then, as president, have power to pardon Trump. Kind of like we saw with the Ford-Nixon example.
Okay.
And the Blackwater guy was the brother of Betsy DeVos.
Oh.
Oh.
He and his group.
We've got just a couple minutes left, and Ron, I want to thank you for presenting this because it is timely. We know that the riots at the Capitol kicked up enthusiasm among the neo-Nazi groups. The intelligence reports that are being reported say they're planning more things, not just on Inauguration Day, but other days and in state capitals. And so maybe the whole KKK and hate issue and Take Back America issue is going to continue.
Yeah, President Lincoln probably turned over in his grave seeing the Confederate flag in the Capitol building.
Steve, this is Jane Watson. I would like to mention that this past week I watched on YouTube from an excerpt from a program that ran called Real Crimes. And in the first season, one of the episodes was about the true burning of Mississippi, or Mississippi burning. And Joseph Sullivan, in his later years, was interviewed about his whole activity there in Neshoba County. And it was very interesting. It runs about almost an hour, but you can go to it on YouTube and hear his whole interview and discussion in real time, but also with some action and actors showing, along with films, what actually happened at that time. It was very interesting, some of the things that they said and how it occurred. One of the things that they did in that county was when they arrested someone for a a crime that was not true, brought up against the colored people and others, they would have them in jail. Then they would let them out at night, and they had contacted the Klan, and then those people were treated inhumanely by the Klan after they let them out of the jail at night, even though they were in jail for some crime that was womped up by the sheriff and his deputy. But it was-
Thank you, Jane. We will look for that. That's a good resource.
Okay.
Okay, Ron, anything more?
Yeah, just about at least a year ago, we showed a segment of this Frontline documentary in Contemporary Issues. And it's regarding the Charlottesville incident. And I'm simply recommending it to people. Again, it's Frontline is posted on, I know we can get it on our TV.
You should be able to get it on the PBS Passport.
Okay. But well worth watching.
Great. Thank you, Ron, for another terrific presentation.
Yes.
Thank you, Ron.
Good discussion, everybody. Hope you have a good week, and let's talk about socialism next week. What is it and why are we afraid of it? The pros and cons. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Ron.
You
Really
bet.
good, as always.
Okay.
Thank you, bye.
Bye-bye.
Here, here.
Cursor. There it is.
Ron, this is Linda.
Yeah,
While you're still on.
I'm
Could
still
you-
on.
Would it be possible sometime in the future to look at a lesson of how long it's going to take for justice on the current police killings where there are no charges, and when charged,